Hello, this is Brian Spivey, the grades 6 through 12 English Language Arts ISS in mainland Japan, the Pacific East. And I'm going to walk you through this session, mapping out growth for assessment capable learners, empowering students to create goals and monitor their own progress through the use of proficiency scales. Now, this part of our session will be built on what we've worked on in previous CCR training days this year. But this time we're going to focus on a tool that teachers can share with their students to help them to be aware of their own growth towards a specific learning target. Our session objectives: to understand the process for creating student-friendly proficiency scales, and to create a growth map for a standard they'll be teaching in the next 2 weeks. And you will have time at the end of the session to work on that. Now, we've created a tool that includes a student-friendly proficiency scale and a student growth goals organizer. Our essential question for the day remains: why do effective assessment practices matter? Our guiding question for this session will be: how can students map out their goals and track their progress towards those goals? So we're going to do a little bit of review here. In quarter one, we explored the concept of the assessment capable learner. Our primary source, the Missouri Department of Education's Educational Systems and Instruction for Learning, defines the assessment capable learner as someone who can know the learning target for a lesson, can describe where they are in relation to the criteria, and they can use that information to select learning strategies to improve their work. In quarter one, we also introduced the Standards Aligned Assessment Planner. This is a teacher tool to help you to plan the priority standards you'll be teaching this quarter, the learning targets embedded in each standard, and then how and when you will assess each learning target. Also in quarter two, we introduced the single point rubric, which was a great way for you to use writing to learn as formative and summative assessments. So this quarter, we're going to introduce something that teachers can share with their students. The primary source for today's work is a handbook for developing and using proficiency scales in the classroom. You can access this book and reproducibles for this book at this website on the slide. Proficiency scales are usually a teacher tool, but with some slight additions and modifications. It can be a powerful tool that students can use to track their own progress, to set growth goals, and to devise pathways to achieve those goals. So this session will be divided up into 4 parts. Part 1 is an explanation of what is a proficiency scale and how does it work. According to MarzanoResources.com, a proficiency scale in simplest terms represents a progression of learning goals with 3 levels of difficulty. The target level, which is level 3, and this is coming from directly from your standards language, the simpler level of level 2, and then the more complex level of level 4. As teachers use proficiency scales to determine the daily class goals, they can mirror a scale's levels of difficulty by employing different kinds of lessons for different types of content. Now, for our purposes, because we are making a student-friendly tool, we have added a level 1 types and levels of support needed. There is a 6-step process for creating a proficiency scale that students can use to monitor their own learning and to set goals. Here on the slide, you see a link to a 1-pager with these 6 steps. Feel free to make a copy of it for your own purposes. So diving right in, step 1 is to determine the topic of the proficiency scale. And where does that topic come from? The standards. So you want to narrow your topic down to the specific content and skills that your students are working to master. For example, in a math class, as a teacher is narrowing down where he or she wants to focus the energy of the class, might say to themselves, while this standard is about money, it's more specific than that. It's about solving word problems with money. So to start out, this person might call this proficiency scale word problems with money. So the next step is to determine the language of level 3. Level 3 is the focus. This is really the proficiency that we want students to reach. So in order to have level 3, you want to incorporate the key language of the standard that explains the target skills. For example, World History Standard 9.5a tasks students to examine the political, economic, and social institutions of feudal Western Europe and the Byzantine Empire, including the role of Justinian and Theodora during the Middle Ages. So these are some of the key terms from the standard that popped up in my mind that would be included in the description of proficient achievement. Deconstructing the standard will be helpful in determining the individual learning targets embedded within the standard. Now, you may want to have students participate in the creation of this list of learning targets. This helps them to see the standard from a user perspective and gives them ownership. And you can write that as I can statements. Earlier this year, we introduced the standards deconstruction tool that can help you to create learning targets from the language of the standards in step 2. This will be very helpful in what we're doing today. Our next step is to determine vocabulary related to the target content and record it in level 2. Before mastering the content, students must know the key ideas and concepts that are part of that content. This is the vocabulary that students need to know to reach proficiency. For example, in that same world history class, when studying feudal Western Europe, some of the key vocabulary terms are these. Students have to understand these terms and how they relate to each other and other concepts in order to master the standard. Now we want to remember, vocabulary is not just a list of words. It's the concepts and ideas that are essential for students to understand your content. Moving on to step 4, determine additional simple content and record that in level 2. So we have two different parts to level 2. In addition to key terms, students may also need to identify or remember basic information as a prerequisite to mastering content. For example, in learning the key terms related to feudalism, students will need to learn the geographical relationships by perhaps studying maps from the time period. Our next step, step 5, is to identify ways a student might demonstrate a level 4 performance. Level 4 is your advanced students who are willing to challenge themselves to hit the next level. You want to have students apply knowledge to something beyond the content of the standard. This may mean a real-world application of the concepts or making the task more complex by looking at it from multiple angles or viewpoints. Now remember, you want to make it more complex, not just harder. In an argumentative writing unit, for instance, students who have already demonstrated proficiency in writing and crafting a written argument may be given the opportunity to argue the same point from multiple viewpoints. Step 6 is determine the means and levels of support needed. One of the most important skills a student can learn in life is self-advocacy. Once they have a clear learning target, they can identify and request the support they need to reach that target. Some students will require additional support in mastering the foundational skills embedded in a standard. With standards that require more advanced cognitive processes, students may have trouble just getting started. Level 1 says that they can perform those foundational skills with additional support. This gives them a path to follow, as they take a longer route to proficiency. It asks them the question, what can you do with help? Level 0 requires students to identify those areas where they need that additional support. This gives them a starting point for tackling the tasks that lie ahead of them. It prompts them to ask themselves the question, what help do I need to get started? Now, we have some resources here. Um, I'm going to use an example of a speaking and listening standard for these maps, for these learning maps. So we have some links here to some that I have created for all the grade levels. And this will be a model for you, and it can also be something that you can use in the classroom. You can feel free to make a copy of them and modify them to meet your needs. Okay, so that ends this part of our session. Our next step is goal setting and progress monitoring. I'll see you there.